Sometimes family law lawyers might bring commercial lawyers in where it's really complex and ask them to assist with letters of instruction and preparing briefs to these experts and advising on which experts are best, and experts in the market that are really experienced in family law disputes. So these things matter in making the right decision, and making sure that the report is compliant with the court rules, that can assist them and the evidence is probable and reliable, and that they're not going to be attacked for their credibility subject to some sort of adversarial attack. So, what are your thoughts on the valuation process?
I think that family lawyers have to be able to create some form of synergy for their clients, and part of that synergy might be bringing in a commercial lawyer, or at least having counsel involved who can assist the client understand and reconcile what value a single expert has put on, for example, that particular business. And 9 times out of 10 at a final hearing, that single expert's valuation will hold up under scrutiny. And despite that, the client will not be happy with the outcome because he or she has not been able to form the level of trust required for them to accept what that value is. And that's a real, reality in family law.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about another topic. Here we want to talk about companies, trusts, and control problems. One of the biggest crossover areas I see is control. Someone may say, I don't own it personally, but they still control it commercially. So common structures that we see are things like company, family trust, unit trust, partnership, sole traders, or professional practice structures. Control may sit through directorship, shareholding, director agreements, shareholder agreements, appointer roles in a trust, beneficiary statuses, loan accounts, personal guarantees, and formal family arrangements. So picking these apart and trying to work it out is often another task that lawyers need to work out, and make sure that they have all the right people in the room, or they have talked to all the right people, because you can't assume. In the law, it's difficult when you can't assume anything. We work on evidence and facts, and assumptions are generally not good in the law, especially not litigation, because you need to work out who in fact has the authority, who's the owner, who's the director, who's controlling what. And in order to actually pick it apart, you need to work those out. It's not always possible. It can be difficult. These are the things that you need to think about. And from the family law side, you need to think about, looking beyond just the title, is whose name is it in, who has an interest in the land. Think about a property. What about where it's in the husband's name, but the wife is contributed for financially to the household, and non-financially contributions through looking after kids and so forth over a 20-year period? Well, she's going to have an interest in the land, isn't she?
In family law matters, property is joint. It doesn't really matter in whose name any property is. Of course, there are those considerations like who brought what into the marriage or into the relationship, and at what point those assets were brought into the relationship. But individual proprietorship is not really a matter for the family court, because it's considered that all the assets are joint. However, it becomes more complex in scenarios where, for example, again, not being gender specific, but in scenarios where the husband is the trustee for a business that belongs to his parents, and for all accounts, that husband has been running that business as the director of the business and as trustee of the unit trust, but the appointers of that trust and the unit holders are, for example, parties that are outside of the marriage. And in this example, the parents of the husband. The question is, how is the court going to view the husband's role in running that business on behalf of his parents, and what kind of financial resource will the court attribute to that party's role as the director or the trustee of that business. That becomes very often a very, very complex and very commercial argument that in most cases the lawyers have amongst themselves.
I had a recent case example where I was acting for a wife who was trying to pick apart her former husband's business and financial affairs. And in this particular case, my client was basically instructing, oh, well, he has an ownership in this and that, and he owns a McDonald's and this and that franchise. And once we get down into the paperwork, we look at it and we realize that he's only got a 2% share. So whilst it might look like someone goes, I'm the owner, I own this place, quite often I hear that from people all around, even outside in my personal life. And when you look at the books, you realize they're not really the owner. They own a small share. And when you look at the dividends that pay down to them, they're quite small. So you can't look at the business and go, well, that asset is he's going to make a fortune. You got to look at what exactly the ownership is. And in that situation, it was a very small amount. It really barely impacted the outcome in that case. And we were only brought in as commercial advisors again on the recommendation of the business value that was involved in that, because the business valuer couldn't value the business because effectively they couldn't work out what the structure was and who was getting what. We had to pick apart all the documents, all the structure, and give the family law lawyers, in that case, acting for the wife, which are mutual clients, we had to give them the advice. We had to say, look, this is the reality. And once that advice was then, it was waived privilege, it was provided as a memorandum and a letter that was provided to the valuer, could then value the business, and it was a single point of value. And ultimately, it wasn't very favorable, unfortunately, to our client. But the reality is, it was the correct outcome. And that's an example of where picking it apart can be important, because it's not everything, not everything that shines is necessarily gold. It has a big label or a name to it, but it doesn't always reflect the reality. So, less focus on the words and what people say and what you're aware of, or gossip and rumors, and more on the facts and the evidence, which really will show you the way.